In this episode, our first impressions of the Zoom F8n. This entire episode is recorded with the Zoom F8n and the indicated microphone. And in this case, we're going to take a look at the new features. Not going to be able to do a comprehensive review. I've only had this for a few hours. I would like to thank Zoom for letting me borrow this for literally about 48 hours. I had a bunch of other commitments, so I only got to spend a few hours with it. But let's take a look at the new features really quickly. First of all, the headphone amplifier has been improved. Now, I can say subjectively that yes, it does sound better. On the original F8, it sounded a little tinny to me and not very balanced, not a whole lot of low frequency response. On this one, it sounds much more balanced. A couple of additional features in the firmware. Number one, you can adjust the volume response curve. So it can respond in an S-curve, sort of a logarithmic curve, or just in a linear fashion. So not a huge difference, but that's actually kind of nice. And then also, there is up to 24 decibels of digital gain. So if you really need to kind of punch that volume through, then you have that option as well. But most importantly, just from a subjective point of view, to me, it does sound more balanced. And if I have to listen to something all day long on a production day, this is a lot easier to listen to than the original F8. The default UI has changed, so the screen appears a little bit differently, and I think it's a little bit more intuitive to use the way they've set it up now, but you can also get to the previous generation modes if you want those as well. So for example, in the default mode, it's called fader mode. The channel knobs control the faders, the amount of that particular channel that is sent to the stereo mix, and then you use the menu encoder or the menu knob to select the channel and change the gain for that channel. So for me, that actually works pretty intuitively. On the previous modes, it was a little bit funky when you had to use the menu knob to change it to fader versus gain trim mode, and then use the channel input knob to kind of tweak it around. And if it was set previously to fader, you had to move it to where the gain was set, and then you could adjust it from there. Just really kind of a little bit more complex than it needed to be. This new mode, to me, makes a lot more sense intuitively, and I think you can get around and make your adjustments more quickly. The advanced look-ahead limiter is a new feature as well. Now, I was a little bit critical of the original F8's limiters, and that was partly because I didn't understand how they were working. I think I have a better understanding of that now. You can use the old generation limiters if you want to do that, or you can also switch to the new advanced limiters. So what I've found is the new advanced limiters work actually quite nicely. If you still have to watch your gain, you get about 10 decibels of additional headroom, so they can manage 10 decibels beyond 0 dBFS. That's one way to think of it. And the way it does that is actually reduces the analog gain of the preamplifiers, brings the audio through the analog to digital converter, and then if it doesn't need to be limited, it increases the gain digitally in the digital domain. If it does need to be limited, it won't increase that. So the advanced limiter also does something where it offsets the audio by 0.5 millisecond, and it uses that additional time to be able to respond to the first transient that may clip. And so you get a nice clean limiting effect. Now, if your talent goes beyond 10 decibels of additional, screaming or yelling or whatever, it's still going to sound not awesome. And that's true with any kind of limiter. But overall, I was pretty pleased. Here's a sample. Suddenly get very loud and then not quite as loud after that. Okay, why don't you tell us about the Cavaliers? Now that we have the advanced limiter in the F8n, as soon as I get my own F8n, I will probably use that before I would use the previous generation limiters. And I think overall they actually sound quite transparent if it's just audio periodically hitting the limiter. So there is a little bit of a penalty in terms of overall raising the noise floor by a little bit. But again, the preamplifiers, just like the original F8n, have an incredibly low noise floor, self-noise floor. And so it's not a huge sacrifice. So overall, really nice step forward in the F8n. Of course, we'll take a closer look at it when we do our final review. One surprise feature that we didn't hear about at NAB when I interviewed Sam from Zoom was that there is also a new auto mix feature. For those that aren't familiar with the concept, what this is, for example, if you're doing a sort of a panel discussion or an interview, what's really nice is you can set the auto mixer on so that when you have, for example, two people talking, what it will essentially do is it will take the fader for the person who's not currently talking and pull the fader back so that you're not still picking up sound into their microphone when they're not talking. And then, of course, it'll do the inverse. When this other person starts talking, it will bring the fader down for the other person. So And it has to work in some sort of intelligent fashion, so it's not cutting people off. And if both people are talking at the same time, it has to make some compromises, so on and so forth. But it's actually a really interesting feature and super helpful for solo shooters. Here's a sample of what it sounds like. So people have asked me recently about you, and they say, what is Emma doing over the summer? And I say she's going to be in a drum corps, in the battalion drum corps, which is based in Salt Lake City. And they say, oh, she plays drums? So tell us, what is a drum corps, and what instruments are involved? What is the overall makeup like, and what do you guys do?
So the first thing these people probably don't know is that drum corps is short term for drum and bugle corps. Okay. So the bugle part is the part people generally don't know about. So I play trumpet, which classifies as a bugle. So there's the brass line, which is trumpets, mellophones, which are like French horns, baritones, euphoniums, and tubas.
Okay.
So that's the brass line. And
wait, are they tubas?
Well, they're contrabass bugles, so they're like tubas that you put on your shoulder.
Okay.
And then so that's the horn line.
Mm-hmm.
And then there is a drum line on the field, and then we also have pit percussion, which is marimbas and vibraphones and all the keyed percussion and like timpani and that stuff, which sits on the front sideline.
Okay. And you guys perform where? On stages?
On fields, on football fields.
Football
so
fields.
We're like marching bands.
And now here is a sample of what it sounds like when we did not use the auto mixer. We plain and simply set the gain for each of the input channels and left one of the mics open while the other person was talking. How long is the summer tour?
Our summer tour is from July 4th to July 24th, so 20 days. Our entire kind of time away is 46 days, but that includes spring training.
Okay. And where are you guys going to compete this year?
We have an Oregon leg of our tour, so Oregon and Washington, so that's Seattle, Tri-Cities, I think, and then we go to California, Idaho, Colorado, and Utah also.
Now, of course, the difference is somewhat subtle, but I think it does make a difference, and this allows you to deliver a better product to your clients if you're, doing the recording for them or on your own projects. The audio just sounds a little bit better. You don't get the phasing effect that you normally would, and you can notice that especially in my daughter's voice as she was talking. Her mic was picking her up, plus my mic was picking up a delayed signal because it's a little farther away. So you got a little bit of a phasing effect if you listen very closely. So that is a really helpful feature, and it seems to be implemented pretty nicely. Again, we'll put it through its paces to a much greater degree for the final review. I haven't had a chance to test this extensively, but the Timecode Generator inside of the Zoom F8, which incidentally was really, really good in the Zoom F8 originally, and now in the F8n, it has an additional feature, which is that when you switch the recorder off, it maintains its accuracy. So this is really helpful on production days when you go to lunch or dinner. You can power down so that you're not powering all those mics and so on and so forth, but you're still keeping the timecode accuracy, which is super helpful. One kind of small feature that they've added that could be a big deal for a lot of people, and that is the ability to record as an audio interface to your computer and to the SD cards inside of the Zoom F8n at the same time. So you don't have to choose one or the other. You can do both, which gives you a really great feature for recording redundantly. There are some really nice hardware advances too. Number one, each of the 8 inputs, which are an XLR, quarter-inch TRS combination input jack, it used to be that if you were recording a microphone, it had to be on XLR. If you're recording a line-level input, it had to be on quarter-inch TRS. And that was, as long as you knew that and you were prepared with the right cables, it wasn't necessarily an issue. But sometimes when you're in a pinch and you only have an XLR cable to get from a mixing board, for example, or some other audio device and get it into your Zoom F8, it's really nice now. In the menu, you can just switch it over and say, this is a line level input now. And it doesn't matter whether it's on XLR or TRS, it's line level. The Zoom F8n recognizes that, and you're on your way. So that's a really nice step forward. It was a little weird that they had always done it the other way, but I think they have done that in pretty much all of their previous generation devices. So this was really nice to see Zoom respond to the feedback that they're getting from their customers. The AA battery tray in the original Zoom F8 has now been replaced with a different type of design where you unscrew the locking mechanism on the door, you open up the door, and now the batteries fit directly into the F8n, as opposed to using the plastic caddy that we used on the original F8 and the Zoom F4. Now, I heard kind of complaints both directions. Mostly what I heard is people that weren't very fond of that plastic caddy, and they were concerned about dropping it and breaking it and then having to find another one and buy, so on and so forth. So that is taken care of. For those that actually really like the caddy because they could keep a spare on hand and pop the old one out and the new one in very quickly, I guess this may be a step backwards. For me, it's not a big deal. I really view the AA batteries in the Zoom F8 only really for really short jobs. If I know I'm just going to capture a couple of quick audio clips and I'm not going to need it for more than an hour, then AA's are fine. But for a production day, I definitely use external batteries through the Hiroshi input. So for me, the AA's really are seen as kind of a bridge battery, just to kind of keep things going as you're changing out your external battery. So just needed to report that in case that's important to you. For me, I'm happy with the change. One thing that was interesting is that the Zoom F4 came out after the original Zoom F8, and one thing that came out about the same time was the F control, which is a linear fader kind of control surface for both the F8 and the F4. The F4 had the ability to power the F control via USB because you have to connect them via USB so they can communicate. The F8 didn't have that capability. The F8n now has that capability. It's not a huge thing, but for me, it's a really nice step forward again because I'm typically, when I'm going to be working from a table, I'll be powering with a big Cine battery or using AC power. And being able to also power the F control with that same power source is really helpful because then I don't have to worry about batteries in two separate devices or separately powering two separate devices. Again, just a really thoughtful small change that adds up to make a really nice new package. Speaking of the Hiroshi input, it's a 4-pin locking connector to get external batteries into your F8. I use this all the time. And what's nice about it is they've extended the voltage range that it can handle up to 18 volts. So some people had 16 volt batteries and were complaining, this is a little dicey. I'm like overvolting this a little bit. Now it's something you don't have to worry about, and you can use those 16 volt batteries without a problem. Most of my batteries are 14.4 volts. That's going to be Cine batteries, or it's going to be high-Q style batteries, which a lot of sound mixers use. So for me, it's not a huge difference, but if I ever run into those 16 volt batteries, now we're good to go on those as well. And one huge thing as well is that the outputs now, the balanced outputs, and a very huge deal from my point of view, the balanced outputs now can be set to Pro line level. That is to say, +4 dBu, whereas before they could only be set to -10 dBV, which is typically called consumer line level. The reason that's important is that when you're feeding that audio to a camera, for example, to a camera's line level inputs, you're now at the level that those cameras are expecting. And so you're not getting a really, really kind of soft, low-level kind of audio recording. You're getting exactly where you want the audio to be. So big step forward. Really grateful that Zoom added that additional feature. You still can select consumer line level out if you want to do that. So you have both options. One really big thing too is that when they originally announced the Zoom F8n, the proposed pricing was $1,200 US. Turns out now that it's hit the market, it's exactly $1,000. So very close to the original price of the F8, which was about $900 as I recall. So all these additional features, $100 more, seems like a fair trade-off to me. I'm really excited about the Zoom F8n. I'm excited to get my own copy of it that I can keep for longer than 48 hours and really kind of put it through its paces. Thanks for all your support and for all your requests for this review. We will come back with a full review later on. Again, this was just sort of a first impressions thing, but it looks like the new feature set makes this a really, really incredible set of features for $1,000. And the closest thing I can think of is the MixPre 10T, which I also have and use quite regularly. This has not exactly the same set of features, but definitely I think this puts the Zoom F8n clearly into the pro realm at this point. This is something that a professional could easily use on a professional shoot and have really all the features that they need. So really nice step forward, Zoom. Again, thanks for the opportunity to borrow this one for a couple of days. If you have any questions, go ahead and leave those down below. If you've not already subscribed, make sure you do that so that you can get the F8n review when that comes out shortly. And if you'd like to be notified each time a new episode comes out, go ahead and click that bell icon. We'll talk to you soon.